Kopiji, mute.
Am I muted? Okay. Am I back? Ellarku namaskara. I'm Gopi K, your host for today. On behalf of VHS Karnataka, very warm welcome to all the wonderful viewers for the 53rd edition of Online Samvada brought to you by VHS Karnataka. We had amazing 52 episodes of Samvada from VHS Karnataka until now, including last one on rewriting textbooks in Karnataka by Sri Rohit Chakratirthaji. What an amazing session was that. Bharatiya civilization is very ancient. We all know that. Thrived for many millennia as civilization Rashtra. Once spread between Anatolia in the northwest to the Philippines in the southeast. Many millennia, Bharatavarsha followed Dharma as its roots. Traditions, values, cultures derived from the Dharma. In the recent times, invaders, colonizers, and communists tried to destroy the fabric of Dharma with their adharmic ways. They even framed the fake narrative saying Bharat was created by the invaders and the colonizers. What a bankrupt theory was that. Today's topic is Bharat, Civilization Rashtra. To know more about this, we have a special guest speaker, Shri Gautam Desiraju ji, honorary professor at IISc Bengaluru, Indian Institute of Sciences, Bengaluru. Sri Gautam Desiraju is a structural chemist who has been in the solid state and structural chemist unit of Indian Institute of Sciences, Bengaluru since 2009. Prior to this, he had been in the University of Hyderabad for 30 long years. Sri Gautam ji is one of the most highly cited Indian scientists with more than 450 research papers and 60,000 citations and an H index of 100. Sri Gautam Desiraju has been awarded nationally, internationally by many for his contribution. His recent book, Bharat, India 2.0, is his first publishing venture outside the scientific domain and is concerned with the constitutional history of India and the reimagination of India as a civilization state rather than the nation state. We are also joined by I think Sri Nikun Shaji just dropped out due to his network, VHS Karnataka State President, and also Sri Tejasji for today's Samvada. Without any further ado, now I request Sri Gautam Desiraju to enlighten all of us on the following, in fact. What is the difference between state, country, and a nation? What is a nation state? What is a civilization state? What is Hindutva? Is there any difference between Rashtra and Rajya and a civilization Rashtra and Rajya? Please, Sri Gautam Desiraju, please welcome and please enlighten us.
ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ ಗೋಪಿಜಿ and everybody else here. ಇವತ್ತು ನನಗೆ ಬಹಳ ಸಂತೋಷ to be able to talk under the auspices of Virat Hindu Sangam. And I think the immediate stimulus for my appearance before you today is this book that I have written and which Gopiji has just mentioned, Bharat, India 2.0. This has been released on the 5th of September, and I'd like to say a little bit about the topic that Gopiji has mentioned in the context of what I have written in this book. And yes, it is about the reimagination of India. And therefore, in this reimagination, it would be more accurate to call it Bharat. And that is why I have put in the title India 2.0, because the India 1.0 is something which is already over. So we are in the threshold of India 2.0, And this book hopefully tries to explain how I feel this can be done. Now, today, what I'd like to do is to speak about 15-20 minutes on certain background things where I feel that there is still a certain amount of confusion or miscommunication even among educated people. And these are certain aspects that I have brought out in the book myself. And there are actually 3 points which I would like to make in this preliminary statement. The first point would be the difference between country, nation, and civilization. The second point, taking from the first, is exactly what do we mean by a civilizational state. And to understand this, we need to know what a nation state is. The third point I'd like to touch on is what is the difference between Rashtra and Rajya. Here I feel that there is a most serious confusion because I feel that these terms, which mean something quite different, Rashtra and Rajya, are just being used interchangeably even. Let's go to the first point: country, nation, and state. And it is easiest for me when I talk about a country to quote directly from the book. Now, I have written here a country is easy enough to explain, and its attributes are something known in the form of, say, an accepted citizenship, which confers on one the ability to hold a passport, a valid requirement to enter another such entity that calls itself a country. So, in the strictest sense of the term, country is a somewhat neutral description and it is an official concept. One may voluntarily give up citizenship of one's country and take up that of another based on rules prevalent in both countries. In some cases, one may even hold dual citizenships. This is not true for citizens of India, but it is true for citizens in many other countries. Now, citizenship, it's important to note, is only an affiliation to the political boundaries of a country. A country is something where the people who are ruling the country are able to define geographical borders, they are able to issue a currency, and it is recognized by other similar units called countries. Hmm. So, a country is determined by rules and not by principles. Now, of course, it is true that a country has a flag and an anthem, and that most citizens feel an unquantifiable emotion whenever they see the flag or hear the anthem. We have all experienced this. However, every time this happens, the idea of a country is being mysteriously conflated in the mind with a higher idea called nation. A nation is a larger concept than a country. And if India describes us as a country, Bharat describes us as a nation. So, country and nation are something that mean something quite different. Country, political, official, governed by rules. Nation is something higher. It invokes emotions, it invokes certain internal feelings of the deepest kind. Many people have tried to define nation, but the definition that I found to be the most appealing and most easily understandable is that given by Ambedkar. Now, Ambedkar says nationality is a subjective psychological feeling. It is a feeling of a corporate sentiment of oneness which makes those who are charged with it feel that they are kith and kin, brotherhood. This national feeling is a double edged feeling, double edged. It is at once a feeling of fellowship for one's own kith and kin and an anti fellowship feeling for those who are not one's own kith and kin. It includes those who feel the same way and it excludes others who do not feel in that way. It is a feeling of consciousness of kind, which on the one hand binds together those who have it so strongly that it overrides all differences arising out of economic conflicts or social gradations. It binds so strongly that it overrides all other differences. And on the other hand, it severs people with this national feeling from all those who are not of their kind. It is a longing to belong to one's own group and a longing not to belong to any other group. This is the essence of what is called a nationality and national feeling. Now, the point to note here, I already said nation is not the same as country. For instance, I can have something called the Kannada nation, where the factor that binds everybody is a love of the Kannada language, the Kannada culture. And this feeling would be shared by anyone who speaks and loves Kannada wherever they may be in the world. You can be in Bangalore or Delhi or New York. But there is this feeling where one feels that one is together with this group. And anybody who is outside this group who do not speak Kannada are outside the group. So, in this way, we can have many nations. But very important to note, every nation doesn't have to become a country. A country, when it is formed, the nation acquires all sorts of other attributes. Now, in the case of a feeling of Indian nationality, now what do we mean by the Indian nation as opposed to, say, the Indian political state? The Indian political state is the country of India, which gives the passports and has the rupee as the currency and so on. What is this Indian nation? And the big question, which I suppose would face an organization like Virat Hindu Sangam, is what is the overlap between, say, Indian nation and Hindu nation? Now, this was actually addressed by Atal Bihari Vajpayee before he became the Prime Minister. I think in 1995 or so, he said in a function in Pune that to him, Indian nation and Hindu nation are one and the same thing. Now, this interpretation can be questioned, and there could be different degrees of overlap between Indian nation and Hindu nation, but nobody can deny that there is a substantial overlap. And when nations start getting conflated with the political state, you get then what is called a nation state. Now, nation state is a concept that is not Indian, it's actually European. It started with the 30 Years' War in Europe, and this is described in chapter 3 of my book. And the 30 Years' War happened because of a conflict between the Vatican and the other European countries. The long and short of it was, by the year 1815, there was a man called Metternich who defined this idea of a nation state. That is, he fully conflated the idea of nation with the idea of country. That's what he did. And there are different kinds of nation states, and it became a dominant mode of the way in which the world was set up because of the dominance of Europe in world politics till World War One. Now, however, when you come to India, there is a higher degree of organization, which may be called civilization. Just like nation is higher than country, civilizational is higher than nature, than nation. Now, here I quote in the book Radhakrishnan, who said in the Constituent Assembly debates, he said that civilization is a thing of the spirit. It is not something external, solid, or mechanical. It is the dream in the people's hearts. It is the inward aspiration of the people's souls. Unlike nation, where you have a group feeling, civilization is very much an individual feeling. Aspiration of people's souls. It is the imaginative interpretation of the human life and the perception of the mystery of human existence. This is very important. It is the imaginative interpretation of human life. Imaginative. This is what civilization actually stands for. Now, what happens now in a civilizational state is that this individual aspiration, which is experienced by every individual, becomes collectively synergized into a group feeling, which quickly translates into a political feeling, which is why we get civilizational states. So you see, it starts with the individual, goes to the group, and finally ends up as a political entity. Now, the civilizational state, unlike nation states, can therefore cover big geographical regions. There are two important civilizational states in the world today. One is India and the other is China. Now, a distinctive feature of a civilizational state is geography. Nation, as I said, you can imagine any nation wherever you are sitting. You don't need geography to define a nation, but a civilization needs geography. And the geography of our civilizational state is what can be called Bharatvarsha. And that is why this name Bharat is so very important in defining us as a civilizational state. It is not Indian civilization, it is Bharatiya civilization. Of course, the geographical limit of this civilizational state was much bigger than the political entity that we call India today. Gopiji has mentioned from where to where it used to stretch. So we lost geographical sacred space. The most important time when we lost it in recent memory is partition, of course, when we lost the Indus Plains. Now, geography is very important because unless you experience the geography, the culture, everything sitting there, you can't fully be a part of this civilizational state. I do quote in the book, and this is the time of Navaratri, Today is Panchami, I believe. And towards the end of the Lalita Sahasranamam, the goddess is described as Dhara, the earth, and Dharmini, the essence of Dharma. I think the actual verse goes something like Dhara, Dharasuta, Dhanya, Dharmini, Dharmavardini, something like that. So notice that she is identified with both the earth and with Dharma. The distinctive feature about the Indian civilizational state is, of course, Dharma. And if you look at the five principles of your organization, I was just seeing them now. The common thread that runs through all these five is, of course, Dharma. This is the unique feature of our civilizational state. Finally, I'll come to this point of Rashtra and Rajya. Now, here there is a serious problem with the meanings of these two words. And most notably, I find, and most distressingly, people, especially the enemies of India, are using the word Hindu Rashtra where actually they should be talking Hindu Rajya. What is the difference between these? In Sanskrit, the political state is known as the Rajya, which straddles the underlying civilization or nation, which is termed the Rashtra. So, if country is Rajya, the nation and civilization are Rashtra. So, Rashtra is a much softer concept than Rajya. In a civilizational state, however, the principles of governance of the political state Rajya are expected to be derived from the cultural practices of the civilization, namely Rashtra. So the Rashtra provides a kind of a soft foundational base, out of which emerges the Rajya. Rajya is actually changeable. It depends on who is in political power at that time, what they are doing, and so on and so on. And normally, the Rashtra is generally supposed to be more tenacious and immutable than the Rajya, which can change over a time due to the temporal nature of governance. This is almost like Shruti and Smriti. So, if Rashtra is the Shruti, the Rajya is the Smriti. So, actually, these features are universal. They are not particular to Sanatan Dharma. For example, in a recent case, if you look at the funeral ceremonies of Queen Elizabeth, you find that the entire funeral, the entire ceremony, everything was done according to the rites of the Anglican Church. You didn't have people from all religions coming and participating in the funeral, even though the UK is a multi-religious country, which gives a lot of importance to the various religious groups that live there. So, this exactly explains what I was talking about. The Rashtra is the Anglican Church. The Rajya can be the political structure of the given time. And so, this means that that country is comfortable with both Rashtra and Rajya concepts. We don't seem to be so comfortable. In fact, I would feel that before 2014, we were actually trying to do something politically which was very deleterious to us. Namely, I said Rashtra should influence Rajya. On the other hand, Rajya was trying to influence Rashtra through the concepts of the pseudo-secularism and all these things. The political state was trying to change the nature of the people, which is extremely dangerous. And I think rightly so, that way of doing things was voted out of power. The use of state capacity to degrade the principles of Rashtra leads to a lot of dissonance. Rashtra can influence Rajya, but Rajya should never influence Rashtra. So today when people say, oh, you want Hindu Rashtra, you want to throw out Muslims and things like that. No. Hindu Rashtra doesn't say all that. Hindu Rajya might say that. If the actual modalities of government are based on the Hindu religion or Sanatan Dharma, then that becomes a theocracy. And I think in a multi religious country like India, nobody wants theocracy, but you want the dharmic underpinning of all the governance structures, which is why people are talking about Ram Rajya in the case of the Padmanabha Swami temple, which the Acharya Chilkur Balaji is also trying to bring up again to the public attention. And if you look at the other portions in my book, the last Maharaja of Travancore actually said that he will accede to India if the principles of Ram Rajya were being followed. And on that condition, and Rajaji supported him when he said that as Governor General. So these are things to be borne in mind. And I think I'll stop there. I wanted to say a little bit about the US and about Russia today, but I think this is a convenient time to stop. And I will invite questions from the panelists and also from the audience. So over to you, Gopiji.
Thank you, Gautamji, for enlightening us on the Rashtra, Rajya, and nation state, and the all these different points, and how we can be very clear about what we need to use. I mean, Rashtra, Rajya should never influence Rashtra, which was happening earlier, as you mentioned. And coming to the point, in your book, you mentioned what is India 1.0 and 1.0 and India 2.0. So, what is the difference?
A very nice question, and a question that many people have asked me, Gopiji. Um, as I said, let us say the story of modern India began on 26th January 1950. That is when we adopted our constitution and we became a fully independent, sovereign, democratic republic, completely free in all ways from the British Crown. So let us say that our modern story starts there. So I think India 1.0 began on that day. Then, constitutionally speaking, we went through a period of about 60 years plus, where we were constantly trying to tinker with that constitution, which might not have been a perfect document, but we tried to tinker with it and put a lot of amendments, a very large number of amendments, 104 to be precise, which indicates one of two things, or it may indicate both the things also. Firstly, that the original document was not so good, and that is why the amendments became needed. The other point is that because of the priorities, political priorities of the people in power at any given time, they did amendments that would suit their political agendas, which is something which ought never to be done. A constitution is supposed to be a very, a document which gives a blueprint for the country for many years. It should not be something that can be just changed so often just to suit the local political compulsions. All these things are described in some detail in my book, what these amendments were and so on. So that by the time, as I said, we went through economically a period of great poverty after 1950. And we went through then after 1967 the period of coalition governments, where again there was no real alleviation of this poverty and there was a lot of administrative and institutional unrest and chaos in the country. So I think the period after 1990 was even more troublesome because different coalition governments were present in the center, and the state governments also, the states became quite powerful. And by 2004, we had the emergency in the middle. Let's not forget that, which was a terrible excursion into unconstitutional and also illegal things, I think, in many cases. And unfortunately, what happened was all these constitutional amendments and other things, they became tied with the political fortunes of just one family. That family became dominant, and almost I call it in the book that it was by, I would say, by about 2000 or so, we were veering towards a quasi monarchy. And I think this quasi monarchy was actually institutionalized in 2004. And this quasi monarchy collapsed in 2014. So it is at that point where I feel that India 1.0 ended. Whatever was going on from 1950 to 2014 was, I believe, India 1.0. All our various experiments with the constitution, with various forms of governance, coalition, state, center, and then this family, I think all this actually ended. Now, I do believe, and I say it in the last chapter, chapter 5 of my book, that I believe that India 2.0 has not yet begun. The reawakening of Dharma in a full scale in our country as the underpinning of the Hindu Rashtra that we want, not Hindu Rajya. Please don't let enemies of our country use this term Hindu Rashtra in a bad way. It is not a bad word. Hindu Rajya is another matter. I don't want a theocracy. I hope India never becomes a theocratic state. I don't want that. There may be others who have their own opinions. I am not very sure. But in the modern world, I don't think that it is something that our country needs. But I think that what happened in 2014 was that people started thinking about who they were. And in fact, I analyzed the 2014 election result. Not so much, I mean, it was obviously a triumph for the BJP, but the bigger thing there was that Indians finally realized who they were. They realized they belonged to this dharmic civilizational state. And among all the options put forward to them, this particular party seemed to be the one which is closest to their concept of that. I think the people of India knew in 2014 that the Congress idea of India is something that they did not want. The pseudo-secularism and all these things. So at 2019, the election result became even more magnified. And that again means that the people were even more sure as to who they are. And I've also written in the book that any political party that gets voted into power and doesn't fulfill the aspirations, dharmic aspirations of the people, will certainly get voted out. Because one thing we Indians like to do is we like to vote. And we take our vote very seriously. The percentage of voters is very high in our country. And we are not at all scared to throw a government out of power. I was a young student in the time of the emergency, and I remember the famous 1977 election. And nobody could have thought that Mrs. Gandhi would be thrown out of power. And everybody quietly went to the polling booth and voted her out. So when a political party gets such a huge majority in the lower house that it has got now, it has to be aware of the fact that people have voted for it for some reason. To get a majority in the Lok Sabha, please remember, it cannot have anything to do with small caste calculations and all that. This is something overall which has happened in our country. So I think that particular awakening has happened, and that's why I feel that this 2.0, it is up to all of us Indians to make this 2.0 a reality. This is not the job for the politicians. What does a politician do? A good politician is able to sense the feelings of the people and he translates it back to them. He says, I understand you guys. And when that communication between the people and the politician is made, they will vote for that politician. That is plain and simple. But if you take this Overton window, they are saying that now the Overton window is gradually moving towards a Dharmic India. So, what might have been considered radical 20 years ago or unacceptable 30 years ago has now become acceptable. And the politician is the fastest person to realize when something has become acceptable. He will say or she will say only those lines because the politician knows that that's what's going to bring the votes. So when you ask me, it's a rather long answer to your question. And people have been a little critical of me in some of the podcasts for giving long answers, but a long answer is unavoidable in a question like yours.
And thank you, Gautam, sir. The other one is um, regarding at the time of partitions, who do you think were on the negotiation table, mainly and also mainly behind the scene? Like UK was there, India and Pakistan at the time of partition as well, and also were there any other factors, other countries involved in this partition?
Other countries? What do you mean, other countries?
Other states. I mean, maybe Saudi or Islamic Brotherhood or like or
At the time of
Vatican.
partition, time of partition.
Yeah, yes, sir.
See, this is a partition is a topic. It flows heavily in my book. By the way, there is hardly a chapter in the book where partition is not invoked, and I think it was a major civilizational moment of Bharat Varsha in the last several hundred years. So the origins of partition lie, I believe, in the separate electorates that were given to Muslims in the Minto-Morley reforms of 1909. And then I think the so-called, what I feel, misguided Khilafat movement of Gandhi, one of the consequences of which was the so-called Mopla rebellion in Kerala and so on, and the fact that people did not react strongly enough to these things. A certain feeling of confidence, I think, did develop among the people who wanted this partition, and then one thing led to the other. People say that the British used divide and rule. But once again, I will quote Professor Radhakrishnan when he said in the famous Midnight Assembly, either it is true that the British did not play fair and square, but then he said, where were we all when they were playing all these games? Did we also not have certain shortcomings that we allowed ourselves to be exploited like this by the Britishers? He asked that question. And believe me, if you look at his speech, which I quote in part in the book, it is addressed to both Hindus and Muslims. Was the Hindu group too aggressive pre partition? Did the Muslim group feel too isolated? How was Jinnah able to capitalize on this feeling that he says Muslims will be threatened in an undivided India? I think by 35 or 1940, practically the die was cast. Ambedkar and Rajaji already were advocating by 1941-42 that it would be better to have partition. And Ambedkar was blunt. He said, we cannot afford to keep the Muslims in this country. Patel said the same thing when he was asked a little later about the boundaries of India. They said, you're drawing a boundary line which is across plains which are not defensible. And Patel made a statement which is prophetic. He said it is better to have a safe army than safe boundaries. And then they asked him what he meant. And then he said that before partition, 50% of the Indian army was Muslim because of the British policy of recruitment. So a group that had 25% population was represented 50% in the army. And Patel posed the rhetorical question that suppose Afghanistan were to attack undivided India for some reason, whatever it is, would we be sure of the loyalty of Muslim soldiers of our army? You see, yeah, this was Patel's response. So he says if division of India means drawing a boundary line on plains, he says I will rather take that than take undivided India with the army as it existed then. So you can see people were thinking about all these things. It's very difficult to say so and so was responsible, so and so was not responsible. If you look, for example, Nehru's conduct in the 1937 UP provincial election, he was strongly for undivided India. And it was an election that the Congress actually won. Subsequent events, of course, it went too fast. So to say that so and so was responsible for the partition, that I don't know. I mean, whether other countries, I don't believe Saudi and all had that kind of influence, and they didn't have. Aramco just started in the 30s. So the oil power of those countries was still not felt in such a way that, and the Muslim Brotherhood was also not that strong. Don't forget that at the time of World War II, it was Britain, Germany, America, they were all world powers. And India and other things might not have been a major concern to them. However, Churchill, I think by 45 or so, realized that if India were partitioned, what became Pakistan would be a very good client state for them because of its superb geostrategic importance. And if you look at the history of Pakistan after independence, you realize that the only asset they had was their geography. And they kept using their geography again and again and again to obtain increasingly large amounts of money from the West. So Churchill was right in that. So there is a possibility that the British wanted partition because they wanted to make a client state over there, and they realized that India, undivided India, would be too big to make it into a client state. But I think this is all could be in the realms of speculation and hypothesis. Many scholars have written about partition and the reasons for why it happened, how it happened. I think in terms of research, it is a perennial topic. And but these are my humble 2 cents worth on this matter.
Thank you, Professor. Let's go to the audience questions. One of the questions says that did Dr. B.R. Ambedkar said our constitution as British Constitution of India? What does that mean?
I don't believe he said that. Somebody else said that, not
Oh, sir.
Ambedkar.
Oh, okay.
Somebody else said that. They said, well, maybe he did. Yeah, he did. Yes, he did. He didn't say that about the constitution. I think he said that about the Montague-Kempsford reforms, if I'm not mistaken. I think
Okay.
he did. Yes, he did make that statement. He said, we don't want a British constitution for India. But he said that long before independence.
Oh,
I think he said that long before independence. Yes, he did. And I think what he meant was that India should develop its own indigenous kind of constitution that suited the culture and aspirations of us. And this business that it is cut and paste and that it is a British constitution, I think this continues. People even very recently have been saying things like this. I have described in my book certain criteria which could be used to decide whether it is a cut and paste imitation or whether it can stand on its own. For example, I have said that Have we been able to address the problems of Hindus and Muslims? Have we been able to address the problem of various castes? Have we been able to address the problem of center state relations? If we have been able to address these problems properly, then I would feel that our constitution is not cut and paste, but it is indigenous, because all these problems are peculiar to India. Hindus, Muslim is peculiar to India. Center state is peculiar to India. And upper caste, lower caste is peculiar to India. Now, if we look at the last history of 75 years, it seems that our solutions to these three issues have not been perfect. Maybe about some 50% success we have achieved in any of these three issues. So maybe we could say that it is 50% cut and paste, 50% indigenous. But towards the end of the book, I argue actually that the constitution itself needs to be changed radically, and that you need a new constituent assembly. That you can't do it with these amendments and all anymore. And it's a high time to start, because, and I've also justified, both France, Germany took about 100 years. They're both republics like us. They took about 100 years to fine tune their constitution. So it's no great sin if the first constitution you wrote was not perfect. And in case of both France and Germany, I describe how they did it. They did make changes over 100 years. But I think now the era of amendments is over. And if we are going to get India 2.0, I think we need a brand new constitution. I think that is the recommendation that I have given. And this is a plan now for not 2 years, next year, next election and all that, but it is something that has to be thought and done over 10, 15 years. So that the goal that we have set ourselves for 2047 and all that become a reality. Because in the present way in which we are going, the system of governance itself being not so good, we may not achieve all those wonderful goals that have been set for us by Prime Minister for 2047.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor. And last question, let's take what is the federal structure of states in India?
Oh, good question. See, Ambedkar and others in the Constituent Assembly called India a union of states. And they did that for a very simple and good and correct reason. Because ideally, a federation happens when different sovereign units come together and give up some of their sovereign powers for a joint good which will suit them all economically or culturally or in some other way. So both USA and Germany, which are two outstanding examples of federal government, they came together like this. For example, in Germany, if you say, the two big sovereign states there were Prussia and Bavaria. Prussia was first and Bavaria was the second. Prussia deliberately gave up some of its powers so that Bavaria could join. Because both felt that Prussia and Bavaria coming together will bring a whole lot of other small states with them, which is what happened, which is how you got modern Germany. That is the greatness of Bismarck. So in a true federation, the constituent units are already sovereign. This was not the case in India. In India, the states were created just for administrative convenience. That is why we have this famous Article 3, which tells us that Parliament can, make and unmake states at will. There was British India, there were the princely states, and thanks to Sardar Patel, all the princely states became part of the whole thing without giving any special different status for those princely states. And then you could redraw all the lines. So these were none of the states then or now were sovereign entities in that sense. So it is not a true federation. In fact, people have called it quasi-federation, pseudo-federation, something like that, something like that. Now, after 75 years, we have to, I think, again reimagine this whole thing, and that is described in chapter 4 when I say that we need smaller states. And that when you get smaller states, you will get economically powerful states with a politically strong center. So part of the problem we have today is some of our big states are too big. and they become politically too important, which is not so good. Not so good for the country as a whole. Yeah, it's a good question.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you a lot. I think time is running out. I think we'll wind out. On behalf of VHS Karnataka, I thank Shri Gautam Desiraju ji for accepting our request and enlightening all of us on Bharat, the civilization Rashtra. Now, at least we are very clear after your speech and enlightening us on Rajya, Rashtra, civilization Rashtra, all these terminologies. Thank you, Shri Gautam Desiraju ji, for enlightening us on all these things.
Ellargu namaskara and happy Dasara to one and all.
Yes, and before that, thank you, Sri Nikunja ji, who left him. He couldn't able to stay for too long because of his network connections. And thank you, Tejas ji, and thank you for all our technical team, Ishwaraya ji, Rakesh Garigi ji. Last but not least, thank you all the wonderful viewers for making this program a success. Please stay safe and wishing you all happy Dasara and Navaratris, in fact. So happy festival season. And please do visit and register at vhsindia.org for further amazing online sessions of VHS Samvada. Thank you all. And before that, Professor, I think Gautamji, you want to mention about the book. Anyway, please go and where is this available, Gautam?
See, this is available in Amazon. It's
Yes.
also available from Hindu eShop,
Okay.
and it is available in Flipkart.
Okay.
And I am given to understand that mostly the first printing is over, and it will go for second printing on Monday. So that's what I'm given to understand by my publisher. So at least some people seem to be interested in buying it. And you can go to Hindu eShop and pick it up from there, actually.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you
Thank you.
all. Stay safe. Jai Sri Ram.